One. All right. You know what it is. You know who it is. We're back for another episode of the BG Perform podcast. Got a little bit of a weird angle on my chair today. Uh,
It's a
gotta
perfect angle.
I gotta set up some stuff here for a podcast eventually. Got rid of this desk we used to have downstairs, but gotta get another one for the podcast. But we are back for part two of Programming 101. Last week we dove into the specifics of really laying out like program days and what that should look like across a week, and gave you a couple options whether you're a beginner or intermediate or advanced, and kind of broke those down. So what I want to do this week, I want to talk a little bit more practical information about the sets and reps that go into that stuff, because we talked a little bit as well about the exercise selection, and we talked about the exercises that we would kind of use inside of those with the six main movement patterns. Obviously, we didn't really go into detail about the specific patterns, because that does kind of vary depending on the person that is either in front of us or the group of people that are in front of us, whatever it might be. But for this, I want to dive into what types of sets and reps we're going to need to make things in the right progression, right? Because I think the biggest thing with programming that I've talked about in the past, if you're on my Instagram channel or just in general, is that programming is overall it's a language, right? And it's something that's communicating to us and giving us an opportunity to kind of like understand what the coach or just the program in general is trying to relay to us, right? And this is especially important online, because I think, a lot of people who are either trying to be online coaches or are just trying to, build the online business. And being honest, like the online space is much more prevalent today than it has been in the past, just because of everything going on in regards to, when COVID happened and all that. And you know, this is the most important thing, right? Because when you're not there with somebody and you're not able to watch and you're not able to kind of see firsthand unless they're sending you videos, the sets and the reps and the tempos and things like that are what make the difference in actually getting what you're trying to get into a program, right? And I think that I have a lot of experience with this. Jerry has a lot of experience with this, where, you know, I struggled in the beginning when I made like a full transition when I started working with Ian. I struggled in the beginning with the in-person to online transition, because, there was such a there was such a buffer of having myself there, that if there was things I didn't like, or if there was things that I adjusted that day, that like they walk in and they just look a little bit tired, or they don't sound like they're 100%, I would make those changes inside the session like immediately, right? And I had this struggle where I would leave things that either didn't make sense or they weren't 100% feeling that day, and because I wasn't there, I wasn't able to adjust and change and make sure that it fit for the individual. And I'm telling you this because it might seem simple to just be like, oh, just put the amount of reps you want and the amount of sets you want. But at the end of the day, if you're training someone who's trying to get a specific adaptation or trying to improve physically, that you need to have this stuff in order, so that when they read it, they know exactly what to expect, the type of output they need, the rest, the tempos, that sort of thing, right? And I think that when we look at the end of this, it'll make a lot more sense after we kind of, because we'll tie everything together. We'll tie together how these sets and reps actually fit into what we talked about last episode with the layouts and the structure and whatnot. And then we'll kind of give you a little bit of an outline of how to fill this out and how you can progress this over time, and what that looks like, right? So anything to add to that?
No, no, that's a good setup. We'll just jump
Cool.
right into it.
Yeah, so I think I'm just pulling up just one little thing because I want to have this here when I do it. All right, so when we look at this, right, the like I said, with programming being a language, we need kind of like a translator, and this is what this turns into. And there's a couple different aspects that we want to look at in regards to the actual sets and reps. Now, one of the stimulus is obviously, and probably the most coveted one, is strength, right? And then I, kind of like as we go thinking about this, and Jerry, maybe you can help me like organize these thoughts as well, like as we kind of talk through this. But there's a strength stimulus we're looking for. there's a power stimulus, there's a speed stimulus, there's more of like a hypertrophy, like accessory stimulus we're looking for. And then even, we can talk about, I guess, like a isometric stimulus as well. But for the most part, with these kind of ideas, the sets and reps are going to change, right? Like if we're going for improving our bench and in regards to like overall strength, we're probably not going to want to have like huge tempos or 10 to 15 reps because it's just not going to translate over to like 1 rep max power, right? And on the other hand, if you're trying to grow and you're trying and especially if you're new in the gym, going for 1 rep maxes isn't the play, right? Because you're just not going to be able to get the most out of it. We'll explain that in a second. So some of the things that I have in regards to like traditional sets and reps, and this is I think you can help me like adding on to this as well.
Mm.
I wrote down a couple like traditional sets and reps that I would use, right? So like 5x5, 4x6, right? Even, you could say like 3x5 would fall into that category as well in regards to like traditional strength. And then for accessory work. Usually stuff I use is in the like 3x8 to 10, maybe 12, 15, depending on the movement. And then even possibly like a 2x20, depending on the movement as well. And then usually for like speed or power work, we're looking at, it could be like an 8x2 or something where it's a little bit less on the reps and a little bit more on the actual sets. So they're getting that rest in between. And, like I said, this is just like a very general. Are there any like traditional sets and reps that you use or anything that you could add to that?
For the most part, mine are pretty similar because a lot of it can just go down to it comes down to you just looking at what's worked in the past for other people, what works for you. One of the bigger things that people are more researching now is perceived effort in those rep ranges. It's really easy to complete a set of like, let's say 15 reps. It's easy to complete a set of 15 reps and feel like it did a lot.
Yeah.
But as far as how close you are to failure, sometimes that can be harder to gauge compared to something like 6 to 8. When you get into like the 6 rep ranges and you're putting in a lot of effort into that, it's easy to tell when it's not going to move anymore because it's less of a burn, more of a fatigue in the sense that it's central nervous system too. So you'll go to push it and it doesn't move. So you're like, all right, I'm getting really close to failure. So a lot of it comes down to being able to perceive the effort that you're putting in. What's coming out of it is dependent on a couple different things, including kind of your uh what's the your what's the word I'm looking for? Like exercise age, training
Yeah,
age,
like you're
your
trained. Yeah.
training age. If you have a very low training age, sometimes those higher rep ranges can be hard to gauge if you are getting the stimulus that you need out of it. Because if you're supposed to be working toward failure and you feel a burn, but that burn is new and you don't really understand it, you might not be getting close to failure. You might just be pushing hard.
Yeah, and I think,
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, depending on the person I'm working with, the rep ranges might change too, whether they're novice or more experienced. But for the most part, that's the general structure that I have is very similar to yours.
Yeah, and I think like obviously just because you do a 5x5 doesn't mean that's strength, right? Like 5x5 means you
Yeah.
do 5 sets of 5 hard reps, right? And four by
Mhm.
six is 4 sets of 6 hard reps. And again, just because you do, and I think this is something that the fitness industry has struggled with, and especially in regards to the traditional, like, I guess, bodybuilding programming, is that they just assume if they do 8 to 10 reps, it's just like, okay, like that's what it is, right? And it always is and always has been and always will be like
Well,
intensity and and
my camera
output.
just died. I'm gonna go plug it in.
All right. Um and when we start to look at this stuff overall, these are, like I said, these are sets and reps that are generally seen throughout the fitness industry, right? And even like the coaching industry. And these are just basic ones that you can add in, right? So when we start to kind of look at this stuff, like a 5x5 is a lot of work, really. And in the grand scheme of things, like it is something that you're not just going to want to like start with right away, right? Because what tends to happen here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we tie everything together. Early on in your lifting career, like your CNS just doesn't have the ability to produce force at the highest levels. Just doesn't have the time under tension. It doesn't have the experience in actually like producing force at the highest level. So your 1 rep max really isn't your 1 rep max, right? And that's why when you start working out in the gym or the first, year that you go into the gym, you see these insane percentage increases in your lifts. It's not to say you're not getting stronger, but it's just like you're already strong, and essentially what's happening is your central nervous system is firing at a faster rate, at a more efficient rate, so it's allowing your muscles to actually like recruit the amount of muscle fibers needed to move said weight, right? So most people are very strong if they need to be, right? And you know, you've seen kind of these freak things that happen where, you know, the stories where someone's trapped under a car or something like that, and these people who are like perform unheard like feats of strength, or like whatever it might be, right? And that's where the central nervous system comes in. And this is why like training at high levels, like truly high levels, is so fatiguing, and why it needs the proper rest times and all that stuff along with it, because if it doesn't have it, then you're not really challenging it in that way, right? And I think what happens nowadays is people just look at a rep range and they're like, oh, it's 5 by 5, it's strength, right? And yes, in theory that would be great, but the output is what's most important. Like, are you actually doing 5 very hard reps for 5 sets, right? And that's where this starts to come in. And this is why it's so important and why we talk about it, because, you know, along with exercise selection, like we talked about last week, it's choosing obviously the movements that are correct, and then choosing the reps and sets that go with it, right? For some things, right? Like if we're going to talk about what what movements might be best for a 5 by 5, you're looking at traditional lifts, bench, squat, deadlift, maybe like a dumbbell press or a military press. What else? More like I'm trying to think if there's any more specific, any
Even
like
like some machine work
yeah, like I
after
would throw
that.
like
Yeah.
some variations of rows, like seal rows and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, Trying to think what machine work, like leg press.
Yeah, I
I would
mean
say,
anything can be like the exercise reps can be tweaked a little bit. And typically machine work is more accessory for higher reps, but it could
yeah,
still be used in that sense as well.
yeah. Like when we talk about 5 by 5, like we're talking about like big lifts, compound movements, utilizing the entire body, really driving, you know, adaptation from the central nervous system and demanding recruitment of the muscle fibers like at the highest level. And all that means is you're just working really hard, right?
Yeah, weighted chin-ups is another one for upper body.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Like
a
we're
great
we're
one.
not we're not going to go into this and be like we're going to do 5 by 5 on bicep curls, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you know what we want to see here is if you're doing a 5 by 5, this is a big, powerful movement, something that is causing you to work. It's causing your entire body to work, and if you do a 5 by 5 right, you're gonna feel it, right? And especially at the right percentages and output, you know, you're gonna feel a 5 by 5, and you're gonna feel it that night. You're gonna feel it the next day. You'll probably feel it like I know some of the best feelings. Like I don't know, obviously maybe it's just because you know this is our career, but like one of my favorite things is doing a fucking heavy ass like 5 by 5 of like bench or squats or deadlifts, and just feeling like that overall fatigue in my body,
Hmm.
and knowing that I did it. Like it's just that's just like a feeling that I love, but you only get that when you actually do like a true 5 by 5, right? And I think, like I said, just doing sets and reps because it's, you know, traditionally something isn't the same as actually completing a 5 by 5, right? Then we have like the 4 by 6. And again, this is just another, you know, variation of that, a little bit less on the reps, a little bit, or the sets, a little bit more on the reps. And essentially the same capacity, one more rep obviously is going to change the lift a little bit when we talk about like the grand scheme of, you know, a specific pattern. And then from there, we, you know, like I wrote down, we get into more accessory work, right? Like again, with the accessory work, we're probably not going to want to do like a bench or a squat or a deadlift at like these types of rep ranges. So the accessory work or the things that supplement the main movements and anywhere, you know, I don't know what you start accessory work at, but I would say like eight's a really good number to probably start at, right?
Yeah, I'll do sometimes I'll play around with the 6 to 8 rep range for
Yeah.
depending on what it is, like
Yeah, I think
split
like
squats
eight
or
to
something.
20 reps of accessory work, whatever it might be, is usually ideal. And, you know, 20 being, like I said, maybe we're doing less sets in a shot, like a single set, we're doing 20 reps. We're probably not doing, you know, too many sets of that. And then 8 to 10 is somewhere usually around the sweet spot. I would say around that 8 to 15 mark is probably most ideal for people. And I think actually now I'm thinking maybe what we can kind of do as like a takeaway is just kind of talk through what a actual workout should look like for each one. And we
Yeah.
can try to do that as quick as possible. Oh, I didn't even set the timer
I was
today.
gonna say we didn't start the timer, I just realized, but that's
Damn.
all right.
All right.
We'll
Um,
still get it done.
Yeah, well, maybe I can start it now quick. Give me 1 second, people.
While Brandon's setting that up too, one thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at the exercises to choose from, like he said, a lot of it, like barbell stuff, is going to be more for the strength. More of the accessory stuff is going to be more dumbbell. And that's just like, that's not
There you go.
just because. Perfect. And that's one of those things that when you are training like strength, your ability to load more onto the bar versus grabbing dumbbells and getting the same output is much, much different. So you can load up a barbell much heavier than if you were to just grab two dumbbells and do a bench press, for example, or even a squat. So
Yeah,
that's
and
why
you'll see
you're not
that.
locked into those, but it's the tool that you should grab is you'll see it'll make sense when we tell you what it is.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think with a lot of this, all of these bigger strength cycles, like you have to be using movements that actually drive CNS, right? And like we said, a bicep curl is not going to do it. A tricep extension is not going to do it. Like we're looking at big movements that you do, and you're like, oh, that sucked, right? So, where were we before I started the timer?
We were gonna start a like building a workout.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep.
All right, so if we kind of dive back, right now, we kind of talked about these general rep and set ranges. If we dive back to what we talked about last week and we talk about that beginner phase, right? So 2 days a week, full body movements. And if we go through and we start to look at utilizing full body, meaning squat, hinge, push, vertical, horizontal, pull, vertical, horizontal, single leg, squat or hinge, and then core carry, which we kind of like threw into the same thing. Me and Jerry are uh, in agreement on that, right? And then from there, we want to kind of implement these rep ranges. Those first couple movements that we see there, like the squat and the hinge or the push and the press, those would fall into my mind more into that traditional strength thing, right? Now, when we start to look at these sessions as a whole, doing full body at that capacity, like you're not going to want to do 4 5 by 5 movements in a single session, right? You'll be dead and you probably wouldn't even get the most out of it, right? So what I would say, what I would recommend, and Jerry could probably back me up on this, or if you disagree, just chime in.
Hmm.
One of those days, having a focus of like the lower body movements having like main capacity, and maybe we're doing like a squat as the main focus with a hinge as an accessory, right? And then the other day having like a push as the main and a pull as the accessory. And then throughout the cycle, you can swap those, right?
Hmm.
If maybe you do a month at that, and then we do another month where we swap those and we kind of focus on the deadlift and the pull, that type of thing, right? And what that would kind of look like, for example, we could do, say we do 5 by 5 goblet squat, right? And just building up to like a heavy set of 5 on the goblet squat. And then the accessory work might be like 3 sets of 8 to 10 on RDL, right? Dumbbell RDL. And then from there, whatever the accessory work might be, like can you think of anything specific? Maybe
For a push.
well, yeah, push pull. So maybe we go like a single arm dumbbell overhead press.
Hmm.
And then maybe we go with like a single arm dump, like a 3 point row.
Yep.
And those would probably fall into the more like, again, that 3 by 8 to 10 type of category. Or I'd say even like Jerry said, like 3 by 6 to anywhere to 15 reps, depending on like how new you are, right? And where this kind of goes, and what I can say about this as well, especially on the accessory work, if you're new, you're probably going to need more reps, and that's okay early on, just because you're not going to be able to get that stimulus of like the heavy weight, right? But what you can do is kind of take a little bit of a lighter weight and go with it a little bit longer. Does that make sense? Like I think that, and I'm explaining that in the right way, is basically what I should ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that like when we talk about this and we start to lay this out as a whole, those are the types of things we need to think about. Strength being low rep, high intensity, accessories being a little bit of like that middle tier, but we're kind of like pulling out the intensity and the duration, which is causing a little bit more adaptation to the muscle, a little bit more damage, micro tears, all that stuff. And then from there, the ending pieces, right? Whether it be arms or core or anything like that, that's where we start to fill in the blanks and start to put in this stuff where it might be that 2 to 20 range, or if it's core work, we might be looking at time under tension. Well, I shouldn't say time under tension, but like time while holding those positions. Some of the core work we might be looking at sets and reps. Maybe it's like sit-ups and things like that. But that could be a traditional lower body, like ideal lower body day for a full body, right? And then we would just move that to the opposite day, just because I don't want to take too long on this. But um, the upper body day, maybe we're looking at like a bench press as a 5x5, dumbbell or barbell, and then we're moving into some type of like bent over barbell row or bent over dumbbell row or alternating dumbbell row, and we're doing that consistently throughout. And then we're, adding in those rep ranges. So we might go 5x5, might do like a 4x6 or even 3x6 to 15, somewhere in that range. And what that's going to do is really allow us to kind of focus on those two big patterns, get the most out of them, and then throw in that accessory work from there as well. So the next day we might see something like a single leg RDL as accessory work, maybe like a walking lunge or a box step up, something single leg as well. Um, had a little bit of like a higher rep range, and then maybe some core work after that, plank, hollow hold, side plank, pull off press, chops, things like that for a little bit of a higher rep range and maybe less sets. And I think like if you do that and that type of idea, right, then you're going to have really good sessions. And if you can get that high intensity early on through one of those big movements, have a good supporting movement after that at a high intensity as well, and then supplement it with the full body accessories, that's going to be a really good day for the average person. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to again kind of recap, one of the most important points that Brandon said there was starting off with that more intense one. If you go into it and you start burning out like with higher rep ranges and then you try to do like your biggest movement of the day at the end, you're
Yeah.
not going to have the same output. So you have to prioritize that strength first, and then all the accessory work after will start to give you obviously those adaptations we're looking for, but it'll do it without taking away from that main lift for the day.
Yeah, maybe we'll dive into this on another episode in the next couple of weeks. Because I'm
Like
realizing as I talk,
exercise
there is,
priority and stuff.
yeah, like skill acquisition, how we would lay that
Yeah,
out
we could
so
talk
someone
about
can
that
understand.
forever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm realizing as I'm talking about this more and more that there's a lot more layers to it, but
Mhm.
it's nothing that we can't
We're
handle,
just
right?
scratching the surface for this episode. We got
Yeah,
plenty
yeah,
more
yeah.
for you guys.
But anyways, so on to that. If 2 days we kind of covered, now let's go 3 days, right? So 3 days we might look at this as a little bit more of like a spreading across the board. That's still that same idea, right? And this is what the beautiful thing about uh, the beginning phases of this is like you're just going to see essentially more specialization on each of these days as you just add days, right? So that first 2 day option is just covering everything, right? On a 3 day option, I think if I remember correctly, we talked about upper, lower, full body, right?
Hmm. Yeah, we
So,
talked about a couple different ones, but that was one of them.
but let's just, yeah, I think just to keep this simple, we'll go upper, lower, full body because
Yeah.
that's probably the simplest. Lower body, right? First day might still look like a squat, might still look like a hinge, but maybe we're just focusing on the lower body for that day. So we go with a single leg squat and hinge as well as accessory movements. So it might look like goblet squat 5x5, RDL, dumbbell or barbell 4x6, right? Or say 3x8 to 10. Then the accessory movements might be like a single leg RDL and a walking lunge. And then we add in some core and a carry after that as well, right? So still kind of layering out those programs so we're still getting the highest intensity and skill. Then we have those accessory work to support that with the core and carry at the end. And that's day one, right? And then we go to day two, which is an upper focus. And maybe again, same layout as day two up the top, where we got bench press 5x5, and then we have some type of rowing variation, whether it be bent over row, barbell bent over row, dumbbell bent over row, and then we have that accessory work underneath that. But again, if we're going horizontal pressing at the beginning, maybe we go vertical pressing for the accessory work and vertical pulling with some core and carry, right? And then at the end, we have that full body day. We can kind of, depending on how you feel, like if you're really sore from doing those 2 days, maybe that third day is like things we normally wouldn't work on, adductors, abduction, we're looking at rotation, maybe we're looking at uh a different angle of pulling. Maybe we're looking at specifics of pressing, right? Like maybe we're hitting like incline, maybe we're hitting like seesaw row, things like that, different variations of the patterns that we wouldn't normally see inside of those. And those full body days could be like different types of movement that maybe limit the amount of strength that we can actually get done, but we're still working bigger, broader ranges of motion, right? So for example, obviously if we're going to want to lift the most amount of weight on let's say an overhead press, right? We'd want to do like a seated military press or like a seated dumbbell variation. But for something on that full body day, that's going to either limit the amount of strength we might be able to do or keep us within like an accessory range would be like a half kneeling overhead press, right?
Hmm.
Like if we're doing that properly, we're probably not going to be able to lift too heavy overhead, right? Where there's going to be some limitation because we're taking away the stability, because we're standing on one leg and a kneeling position, because it's one arm and we're going through a weird range of motion, like all of that, right? So those are things to kind of think about on that third day in this, I guess, this 3 day programming. And I think this will be the most popular that people will probably take away just because like it's 3 days. But I think that like with that being said, that this layout right here is really good because you get the focus on the lower, the focus on the upper, and then you're on that third day, you're really kind of getting the things that you're missing out on the other days, but keeping it within like a hypertrophy accessory type of setting. Did I explain that well?
Yeah, that makes sense. And using that third day too to like just check off the boxes because the lower day and the upper day, you're gonna hit the big rocks for both of those days. So there's gonna be ways that you should basically accumulate more volume that you weren't able to get on your lower and upper day. You could just throw it into that full body day, and then you're hitting the volume that you need to see the stimulus. But it's also nice because if you're not going as heavy, you won't be as tired by the time it comes to next week. You could throw in as much effort as you need into those big rocks for day one and two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, anything to add to day 3? That's it.
That's pretty much it.
Or
Yeah.
3 days, I should say. Cool. So
Add a
then
little,
4 days.
I'd say one other thing. One other
Yeah,
thing is if you're practicing any skill work, that might be a good time to like start the day off with the skill work, especially if you're not going very heavy in the beginning. Have fun with it, add a little flair to it, but then take care of everything else afterwards.
yeah, good. All right. And then from there we have 4 days, right? So for me, and again, when we get to more days, this is where things might differ. I could be wrong. They might differ between like Jerry and I. But I think we're kind of on the same page with this. But 4 days a week in my head I would give kind of each of these their own focus, right? So we might have like a full squat or knee flexion focus day. We might have a full pressing focus day. We might have a full pulling focus day, and we might have a full hinge focus day, right? And with that being said, while those each have their own day, we're still following the same template, right? Big movement 5 by 5, second movement 4 by 6 to 8 or 3 by 8 to 10, something like that. And then those accessories underneath around that 6 to 15 rep range and anywhere between like 2 to 4 sets. And then the core and carry at the bottom, right? And you're just kind of spreading that out across the week. So it might look like day one is a squat focus, day two is a push focus, day three is a hinge, and day four is a pull, right? And then you fill in the blanks with everything else. So with those accessory works, you do a little bit extra pulling. You can do a couple different pulling variations. For the hinge, you could do a couple hinge variations. For the push, you can do a couple push variations and so on and so forth in those reps ranges and kind of like layout of the program. Would you have any differing opinion on that?
As far as structure goes,
Yeah,
I mean, we talked about a couple different like 4 day programs, but that's
yeah.
as far as structure based on what you're doing that day, basically the same thing.
And
Heaviest
again,
stuff in the
I want to
beginning.
kind of reiterate here too, not to cut Jerry off, sorry, but like this is general, right? This is for an average person who's just trying to get fit and stay in shape. Obviously, athletics, things like that, there might be changes if there's specific events or things we have to work on. The other thing is too with some of this stuff, this is very general, right? We're kind of quickly covering over the basics and kind of giving you guys an idea. So when you listen to this, you can kind of take it away and start to like plug in the pieces for yourself, right? But I think with most of this, like some people might not be able to do legs at a high capacity, right? Or there's injuries or there's things like that, and you just got to tweak. It's more about the concept of like start big, right? Start with these big high output movements and then slowly dwindle it away as we go with the intensity, the skill level, the reps and sets and all that stuff, right? So, okay, so basically, then we have 5 days a week, and I think again, when we look at the 4 day a week, it's literally five days. It's the same thing with just an extra day, right? So a little bit more specialization. I can't say that word fast. Specialization.
There you go.
There we go. But adding an extra day and just focusing on that a little bit more, making sure that we're putting ourselves in a position where if we have anything we want to focus on there, we can add it in. Some people might add in like a specific vertical pressing day. like vertical press pull. We could like that's ideally where my head would go with it. It'd be like a squat focus movement, then a push focus movement, then a pull hinge focus movement, then pull focus movement, and then maybe vertical press pull type movement on the accessory days, right? And anything to add to that? Would you do anything different there?
No, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And then 6 days is the same. Like as we get to these bigger days or these broader days where we're having, uh more than like 3 to 4 days, it's just more specialization, right? It's just more days that we can add to the mix of specific accessory work, right? Now that we kind of gone over that, any other broader topics on that end or anything to add to like the kind of umbrella of that?
No, no.
Cool. So I think now that we talked about that, like the again, if we want to get a strength stimulus, we have to keep strength type output, right? And 5x5, 4x6, anywhere in that range is going to give us enough output that we're able to keep the weight heavy, but we're not going outside of that energy system or whatever you'd like to call it. Uh, that we're able to give that max effort that we need inside of that range, right? And then obviously from 5 reps below, when we talk about 4 reps, 3 reps, 2 reps, 1 rep, those are very high output, right? And I don't know how you feel about this, but like in the last few years, I've kind of shied away from 1 rep maxing, and 1 rep max in general. Maybe on occasion if I like really feel good, but I don't see the benefit long term unless I compete. And I also feel like, the ranges of 2 to 3, maybe even 4 reps, but I find 3 and 2 rep ranges to be like superior in my mind because I feel like it gives you a better output of the actual person's ability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can calculate 1 rep max from a 2, 3, or even 4. So like it's a risk versus reward thing. Even if you're going into competition and you're getting ready for uh like a powerlifting meet, I would say like in your last few weeks, like maybe touch 2 reps and then like you have your deload the week before so you can kind of recover and get ready for competition. But 1 rep maxing is really not necessary unless you're in a competition. For
Yeah, and I
and
think
that's
like
for the most part for general
I think
people.
for the biggest thing for me is overall, I think it is important for people to feel what it's like to do a 1 rep max in their life. You know what I mean? Like I think that's a very important lesson you learn in trying to go for a 1 rep max and knowing that like it's different than a 2 rep max. It's way different than a 3 rep max. Like it's a different feeling when there's just 1 rep you have to complete at the heaviest weight that you've ever done. And it's definitely something that you have to learn. And I think that for people who want to compete or want to, I guess, be in this field, like you have to know the grind of going through a true 1 rep max, right?
Hmm.
And I've gone through some scary ones. I remember when I hit my bench PR last time in my garage by myself with no spotter, probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. Went for 320. I got it, but it was one of those moments where I go back and watch the video now sometimes, and the bar just stopped. I was like, all right, I got this. Boom. And the bar just stopped. And I was like, fuck. I was like, if I don't get this up, I'm gonna die. And I just like
Yeah.
probably the longest rep of my life. And I was just going, 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 and I finally got it. But like those are the types of reps where you like I feel like you have to feel at least a couple times in your life to know, how important they are, right?
Hmm.
And I think that, another thing to kind of take into consideration here as we move forward into this topic is like failing is not something, and I don't want to spend too much time, but like we don't want to fail, right? And I think that a lot of times when you go for 1 rep maxes, you have to be prepared to fail, right? Like you have to be okay with the bar not going up. And I think with some people early on and just some people in general who don't who fitness isn't their life, failed reps aren't necessary, right? And I think that like in this concept, the less you can fail and the more you can succeed and put yourself in that position, the more you're going to get out of a program regardless, right? But at the end of the day, like I said, we want to get strength responses. We want to keep the reps a little bit lower. We want to keep the weight a little bit higher in that output so we can maximize the weight that we have underneath us, right? And then when we talk about that hypertrophy response or that like build muscle size type of response, we want to keep the weight just a little bit lighter, but still in that range that we can push it and get that like high end stimulus or like that burning feeling, I guess we could describe it as. And that's going to help us create a little bit more of an efficient adaptation. And then from there, ideally, like if we're trying to get like this speed and power, which we didn't really talk about too much, because it's a little bit more specific. Like it's not really something that, I mean, I don't know, I doubt you use it, Cherry, but like with general person, I'm not trying to do anything crazy with like the speed or the power and output, right?
No, only my athletes I
The
really give
only
it. I
thing I
mean,
would
it's
add in
important
for
to get power
athletes,
stuff, but you can get that through other ways. It doesn't have to
yeah,
be as
and
extreme.
the only thing I would add in for athletes at some point is
Hunger Games would be gone.
yes.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add in there is like for athletes who are building speed and power, I would add in those speed sessions or exercises before at the very like start of the session, like our strength work.
Power and
That's
skill
that,
work go hand in hand on where they should be within your program.
and you want to think because power and speed is like literally CNS, right?
Hmm.
It's the highest amount of muscle activation you're going to receive in your body, or you're going to be able to achieve in your body. And we want to be able to do that efficiently, right? So, speed and power, we want to keep the reps a little bit lower. We want to keep it powerful and repeatable, and we want to make sure that we're able to do that. So we're going to see a little bit less on the reps, a little bit more on the sets, depending on the movement, and going from there. Um, but yeah, I think I don't know if there's anything I have to add to that. Is there anything that we talked about today that you think we need to add in regards to like sets and reps and
I mean, that's we can go really deep on a lot of the stuff we talked about. So as far as like keeping like scratching the surface and then diving deeper in multiple episodes,
oh,
I think that'd be
let's
better.
talk about one more thing. We'll lightly dive into tempo. I think I've gone back and forth on tempo in the last couple of years. I think that tempo is really important in beginning phases. I think after that, it's difficult, but I think it can add to a program in a lot of ways. So tempo, if you're with a program with me or Jerry, tempo is usually written. You're going to see it as the first set of numbers on an exercise, right? So you might see it as like 30x1 or 2121 or 20x1, whatever it might be, right? But that tempo is that first portion of the workout. And no, it doesn't mean 30 sets of one. No, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
21 sets of one, whatever you might think it means. It's read from left to right. And if you read it from left to right, and for example, 30x1, it'd be a 3-second eccentric or 3 seconds on the way down. So let's do this in regards to like a squat, right? So on the squat, when you start from the top, bars on your back or kettlebells out in front of you, and you're going to go down, you're going to go 3, 2, 1. That second number is going to be the pause at the bottom. So whenever you hit that bottom, if it's say 30x1, that means there's no pause at the bottom. That third number, the X, is going to be the concentric, so the way back up of the movement. And then that last number is going to be the pause at the top, right? So example squat, 3, 2, 1, up, pause. 3, 2, 1, up, pause, right? You can't see this if you're not watching. My hands just moving up and down. Picture a squat, close your eyes, meditate, think about the
Unless you're
guy.
driving, please keep your eyes open.
Yes, yes. If you're driving, yes, sorry. Um, so from there, you add that into the patterns, right? And the one thing you have to realize about tempo is it can be very good, but it is going to limit, right? If you're doing a 70-pound goblet squat for 5 reps and you throw in a 3-second tempo to each rep, you're probably not going to do 70 pounds, right? So tempo is a really good way early on in your lifting career. So if you're just starting out lifting, or if you're just getting really into like strength work or trying to drive CNS and muscle fatigue and CNS activation, tempo is a really good way to do this, right? Because it's going to limit you. It's going to stop you from lifting too heavy, and it's going to cause you to control the entire range of motion that you have to go through, right? And tempo can be really specific because we can do, like I said, we can do 3-1x1, which means it'd be 3-2-1, pause, up, pause, right? And you can even go 3-1-1-1, right? So it'd be 3-2-1, pause, control on the way up for a second, pause, right? You can get really specific about the patterns. If there's something you want to work on, say in the deadlift or the squat, if you have a weakness and you compete and you have a weakness at a specific point in the deadlift or the squat, the tempo can really kind of help us isolate that position, get the most out of it, train it, and then create adaptation, right? But tempo, like I said, I think in its very basic form, just controlling the eccentric on most movements. I think we can both agree on that. Maybe I don't know if there's anything else like you would add to that, but like if you go for a bench press and you just count to three on the way down, for some of the patterns, you're gonna get a lot out of that, right? And the squat, anything else, there's some stuff I don't really use it for because it doesn't make sense, like lunging or and whatnot. But I think outside of that, tempo can be utilized very well, and especially for like hypertrophy and that isolation or what was I gonna say? The isolation, accessory movements. Sorry, those adding more time under tension, adding more uh, control through the ranges of motion, especially in those higher reps, you're gonna feel that burn. Like there is not many things like I remember one time I did the front squat. There was a front squat where it was like a 5-5-5-1 tempo. 5 seconds down, 5 second pause at the bottom, 5 seconds on the way up, 1 second pause at the top. It was brutal. And I did it for like 8 to 10 reps or something like that at like
Yeah,
75 pounds. That was
I
like
feel like
early
that was
Marcus
from a
Filling.
program we both did because I vaguely remember hating that
ATS.
so much.
Early
Was it
ATS.
ATS? Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
God, that was fucking brutal. I do remember
Yeah.
that. That was like a testing week in the beginning, I think.
Yeah, it was like the very first week. It was like the very I think it was ATS too. It was like the very first movement
Yeah.
we did in ATS
I
too.
remember I sent it to you and I was like, am I fucking losing it? Like, does he want me doing this? Yeah, that
That
was
was
rough.
brutal.
I do
I
remember.
think I did 65 pounds, 75 pounds, and then 80 pounds for the whatever the cycle
Yeah,
was.
it was not very high. I
Yeah,
remember doing it and I was like, Jesus, I feel like a bitch.
it was
It was
brutal.
rough.
But yeah, I think that's a lot. I think I'm really enjoying these types of podcasts.
Yeah, I like these a lot more. I think it's nice too because like this is something that you could test out next time you step in the gym. You could let us
Yeah.
know how it
And
worked.
these are, like I
This
said,
isn't
this is
something that like takes
practical.
weeks to build. This is something you could start now.
Yeah, this is practical information that you can take, use, and go with it, right? And I want you guys to listen. This is a lot of information. If you take notes, go through that process. If not, reach out, right? Ask us questions and we can explain this a little bit more. I am putting some of this information inside of the channel. So if you haven't joined the Daily Discipline channel on my Instagram, and I have to see if I can make you an admin on there. I think I can make you an admin. But
Possibly. I'm in there.
yeah, but I feel like are you a collaborator?
I don't think so. I don't know. I could check.
Let me see. Let me see. Jerry Nova. No, wait.
That's the wrong one.
Yeah. Coach Jerry Hayes.
That's me.
I think I just invited you to be a collaborator. Um,
I don't know. It
check on
just
your
brought me
Instagram.
to the channel.
We'll see.
We'll figure it
Anyways,
out.
we're gonna figure that out. We'll get Jerry in there so he can get some posting in there as well. But if you haven't joined the channel, that's where I post a lot of this stuff first. And then I like to talk about it like on the podcast a little bit more in depth. And if not, just message me. I'll help you out with whatever you need or explaining this a little bit more. Or if you don't want to deal with it, join our program. We got Dinner Party, we got Transcend. If you're a fighter, we got the Fight Camp. If you want to work with me or Jerry a little bit closer, we have the VIP program. And I have a couple more things that we're going to introduce this year as well, such as fitness consults and performance consults as well. So if anybody wants us to just look at their program and they just have a program that they're doing, but they want a coach's kind of overview on it or just our expertise on a couple things to change or how to progress it, you can come to us for that as well for a one-time fee. So adding some more options in, trying to get things going, trying to make sure that we're giving everybody their, the time and help that they need in as many ways as possible. And I always appreciate you guys for listening. And if you need us, again, at Coach Jerry Hayes and at BG Perform _. One day I'll actually change the name.
Yep.
And yeah, so I will see you guys next time. Peace.